CD2 Chapter 7 Puzzles in Fiction. At first, Holmes thinks the message is in code, but then he sees the meaning. Every third word is the real message. The French writer Victor Hugo wrote a book that was translated into English and sold in Britain. He wanted to know how well the book was selling, so he sent this message to his British bookseller. ? The bookseller wrote back to tell him that the book was selling very well. His message was ... Many writers also like to use puzzles and secrets in their books. Sherlock Holmes. Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes detective stories are full of secret codes and symbols. In The Adventure of the Red Circle, Sherlock Holmes solves a case by watching a man walk in front of a window with a light. The man shows the light once, then several more times, before stopping and starting again. Holmes understands that the man's light is communicating one letter after another. One light means A, two lights mean B, three lights mean C. Even after Holmes has understood this, the letters do not seem to make sense. Is there a secret cipher, or are they code words? Then he realizes that the messages are not in English. They are in Italian. Finally, after a warning is repeated 3 times, the message is changed to the word danger. When the message suddenly stops, Holmes rushes to see what happened. He finds that the man with the light has been murdered. Holmes uses the light at the window cipher to help solve the crime. Lights at a window are also used in another Sherlock Holmes story, The Hound of the Baskervilles. But these lights are used as a simple code to warn a criminal. In stories by other writers, people often use mirrors to send messages and warnings. In Conan Doyle's The 5 Orange Pips, a man receives a letter with 5 orange seeds in it. His nephew John does not understand it and watches his uncle burn a box full of papers. John's uncle soon dies in a mysterious way. Later, John's father receives a similar letter, also with 5 orange seeds in it. This letter asks him to put the box and its letters outside. He cannot because they are already burnt. He soon dies as well. Sherlock Holmes understands that the 5 orange seeds are a code for "you will be killed." He promises to help John, but that night John is also murdered. The Musgrave ritual contains an unusual puzzle that the detective must solve. Holmes has a friend called Reginald Musgrave. Musgrave has a strange document that has been in his family for a few hundred years. It begins like this: "Whose was it? His who is gone. Who shall have it? He who will come. Where was the sun?" The document then talks about trees and steps and directions. But no one in the Musgrave family has ever understood it. 2 people disappear while they are working for Musgrave, and Holmes tries to find out what happened. In fact, the document has several map clues to find something that was hidden long ago. It is finally found, but looks unimportant: a bag of old metal and stones. But Holmes cleans them and explains that they are the royal jewels of the first kings of England. In The Glorious Scot, Holmes goes to visit his old friend Victor Trevor. One night, Trevor's father receives a letter. It is a very simple message of just 2 sentences about hunting birds. But Trevor's father is deeply shocked and he soon dies. Trevor shows Holmes the letter, but it does not make sense. At first, Holmes thinks the message is in code, but then he sees the meaning. Every 3rd word is the real message. Trevor's father has an enemy who has talked to the police about the father's secret criminal past. Sherlock Holmes' most famous cipher case is The Adventure of the Dancing Men. In this story, a man comes to Holmes with a copy of a drawing that he has seen around the outside of his house. It is a row of stick figures that appear to be dancing. These dancing men mean nothing to the man, but they upset his wife. She seems to know their secret, but she will not tell him. Holmes looks at the message and begins to guess what each dancing man might mean. It is a cipher of symbols. Each dancing man is a symbol for a different letter. Soon, Holmes discovers the meaning of the messages. But he is too late. The man is dead, and the police think that his wife has killed him. Holmes finds a way to catch the real killer. He uses the dancing men's cipher to send a message to the local hotel. The killer quickly comes there and is caught by the police. Holmes' message is the one above. It means, "Come here at once." The murderer is surprised that anyone can understand his code. Holmes explains that one man's invention can always be understood by another man. Edgar Allan Poe. Like Arthur Conan Doyle, Edgar Allan Poe was a writer who was interested in ciphers. He wrote newspaper stories about them and invited readers to send him secret messages in their own ciphers. People were surprised that Poe could read their secret messages. But Poe himself only used very simple ciphers, where one letter or symbol was used for another letter. Later, though, he wrote about how to solve ciphers, and his notes were used to break German ciphers during World War I. Poe also used a secret cipher in his short story, The Gold Bug. In the story, an insect collector draws a picture of an insect he has found. The drawing is on a piece of paper he has also found. But on the other side of the paper is something else, an old clue to something that was buried. After finding a page with secret hidden writing on it and breaking a cipher, the insect collector finds a fortune in gold. Poe was a writer. Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories, was a doctor, not a detective. He started writing detective stories because not enough sick people came to see him, and he needed another way to make money. But the famous British writer Somerset Maugham was really a spy. Somerset Maugham. Maugham was British, but he was born in Paris. When he was very young, he learned to speak English, French, and German. He was so good at languages that Britain's spy department sent him to be a spy in Geneva, in Switzerland. In Switzerland, Maugham pretended to be a French writer. He collected information from other spies about the German army and sent it back to England. The information was hidden in code in Maugham's handwritten books, so the Swiss police never looked at them too carefully. After World War I, Morn wrote stories about his spy experiences, but he had to burn most of them because they contained too much secret information. In 1928, though, he did write a book about his work as a spy in St. Petersburg, Russia. The name of one of the people in the book was Somerville. This was the name Morn used when he worked in Russia as a spy for the British government in 1917. Johnny got his gun. Not all stories with codes and ciphers are about crimes and spies. In 1939, Dalton Trumbo wrote a book about an American soldier in World War I who loses both arms and both legs and the ability to see, speak, or hear. He eventually uses Morse code to tell his story by hitting his head on his pillow. Trumbo hated war and wrote the book for people who thought that war was exciting. Dan Brown and the Da Vinci Code. One of the most popular books in the world today is a story about secret ciphers and codes. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code has been translated into 44 languages. It begins with a murder at the Louvre in Paris. There are strange symbols around the body, which the dead man wrote himself in his own blood. A man with a specialist interest in symbols and the dead man's granddaughter, a specialist in ciphers, see them. Together, they follow a number of clues. Many of the clues are connected with Leonardo da Vinci, an artist and inventor who lived in Italy 500 years ago. On the cover of the Da Vinci Code, there are other clues. These clues have no relationship with the Da Vinci Code, but are connected with the subject of Brown's next book. Thousands of readers followed the clues and were able to solve the puzzle. The clues led them to a piece of art at the American Spy Department, the CIA. The work of art is called Kryptos. It is a large public cipher puzzle with letters cut out of metal. The Da Vinci Code mixes fact and fiction. One fact is Brown's description of a tube-shaped container with discs that need to be lined up in the right order. If they are not, or if the tube is broken, a bottle of liquid inside will break and destroy the message. Leonardo da Vinci invented this cipher tube. Chapter 8. Mountain Fires to Enigma. British scientists could not discover a way to break the code. Finally, they found the reason. It has always been difficult to send secret information over great distances. When the Greeks celebrated the fall of the city of Troy in 1084 BC, they immediately wanted to tell their queen, Clytemnestra, the good news. She was 800 kilometers away in Mycenae, a 2-day journey by horse or a 5-day run. Instead, the Greeks used signal fires. The first fire was lit, and then another 70 kilometers away, as waiting soldiers saw the signal. Each fire was lit in turn. 12 signal fires brought Clytemnestra the good news in a few minutes. For hundreds of years, fires on the tops of mountains were probably the fastest and easiest way to send a message across a great distance. But very little information could be sent this way, usually just a warning or news that was expected. Also, there were disadvantages. Heavy rains or cloudy weather could make the fires less easy to see. If the soldiers on the mountains were not paying attention, they could miss a message. other places, other ways. People in different parts of the world found other ways to send messages. Smoke signals, for example. Native Americans built a fire and used a blanket to send up small clouds of smoke. Friends saw the patterns of smoke and understood the code, but other people might just think that it was a fire. These signals were not an effective way of sharing information. Part of the message, or the whole message, might not be seen in time. Like mountaintop fires, smoke signals might not be seen during bad weather. They were also useless at night. In parts of Africa, drums were used to send messages, especially in places where you could not see mountains or smoke. People could beat drums in different ways, so drums could share more information than mountaintop fires. Drums were also better because people noticed the sound of drums without looking in their direction. But when enemies heard drumming, they could drum too, and the noise could make the first message impossible to understand. Mechanical semaphore. In the late 1700s, a new idea became popular in France. It was a mechanical semaphore, similar to semaphore signals used over short distances by soldiers. Claude Chappe and his 3 brothers did not have jobs and were looking for a way to make money. They decided to build mechanical semaphore stations to send messages from one end of France to the other. At first, the brothers tried to use large squares of metal that looked like normal semaphore flags. But these metal flags were not easy to see over great distances. Instead, the Chappe brothers connected 2 large metal arms to a cross arm. The 2 metal arms had 7 positions each, and the cross arm had 4 positions. Together, they could offer a total of 196 symbols, including letters, numbers, and special symbols in code. The brothers built several lines of stations across France. Each station was on a hilltop 12 to 25 kilometres from the next one. There were, for example, 15 stations in the 240 kilometres between Paris and Lille. A 50-letter message could be sent in an hour. The Chappe brothers' invention was soon popular not just in France, but all around Europe. But it still had a few problems. The stations were hard to see in bad weather, and although the Chappes tried fixing lights to the arms, the lights could not be seen clearly at night. Messages could be sent in code, but everyone could see Chappe's semaphore stations, so it was possible that someone could break a code and learn a secret. Few business people wanted to use the stations. Finally, another invention took the place of the Chappe's semaphore stations. The inventor was a young American artist named Samuel Morse. Morse code. Morse studied drawing and painting, but he was also interested in electricity and inventions. On an 1832 boat trip from London to New York, he heard some people talking about electrical magnets. He decided he could use electrical magnets to send messages over great distances. An electrical signal could turn a magnet at the other end of a line on and off. Morse worked on his invention for 6 years. In 1838, he finally showed the world a telegraph that could send a message in a code of short and long sounds. This code could be sent on an electrical line, read at the other end, and turned back into words. Interest was slow at first, but then Morse and several companies built long-distance lines to carry news around the United States. Although it was very convenient that messages could be printed out on paper, trained Morse operators could receive 50 words a minute by ear. Morse code telegraph messages could be sent day or night over any distance. There was one problem. Telegraph lines could be cut or knocked down in a storm. But people still learn Morse code because it can be sent with mirrors, lights, or bells. The most famous Morse code signal is SOS, the signal for help. ... dash 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 ... Secrets by radio. The invention of radio allowed people to send secret messages through the air. Even after radio became used more than telegraph lines, Morse code was still popular. But anyone with a radio could listen to the messages, so radio messages were often sent in code. This was especially true during times of war, but also for normal business secrets. For example, banks frequently sent secret messages to their offices around the world. Governments and businesses were always trying to break each other's secret codes. Most early codes were not too difficult if you were clever and had some skills in mathematics. But in 1933, the British government began noticing strange secret Morse code messages from Germany. British scientists could not discover a way to break the cipher. Finally, they found the reason. These new messages were made using a new cipher machine called Enigma, invented by the German inventor Arthur Scherbius. At first, Scherbius sold the Enigma to German companies, but the German government soon took an interest in Enigma's ability to offer unbreakable codes. The machine itself looked like a box with keys and several discs that turned around each time a new letter was pressed. The Enigma's discs could be changed, and the machine could mix every single letter of a message into a new and different cipher. When World War II began in 1939, Germany used the Enigma machine to communicate with its ships and submarines, as well as with its armies abroad. Enigma operators used secret code books to broadcast their Enigma messages each day. The Germans broke other countries' codes and ciphers and used the information to attack planes and ships in the Atlantic Ocean. Someone needed to break the Enigma cipher. Breaking Enigma. Before World War II, Polish mathematicians were able to steal a German Enigma machine and began to understand how it worked. But the Germans then added more disks and made the code more difficult. Suddenly, Enigma could send a coded message in 159 trillion ways. The British government hired many of England's top scientists and mathematicians, and many people who were simply good at word games and finding solutions to puzzles. They were sent to break the Enigma cipher at Bletchley Park, a private home with large grounds outside London. Bletchley Park soon became the centre of British code-breaking activities. Every day, thousands of enemy messages were collected and sent there for people to work on. Among these code-breakers was the young mathematician Alan Turing. Turing had two important ideas that helped to break Enigma. He learned that no letter could ever be a code for itself. A ciphered A could not be an A. He also learned that at 6:05 each morning, when German ships and submarines sent their weather reports using Enigma, they often used similar words like times, dates, and the German word for weather. To save time, Turing invented an early computer which matched coded messages to real words. Turing's computer and codebooks from a sinking German submarine helped the British solve the Enigma ciphers and read all secret German messages. Of course, the British government did not tell the German government this. Instead, they used the information to stop German attacks on their ships and to attack German ships, planes, and submarines. The British sent messages about each success in a radio cipher that they knew the Germans could understand, pretending that their successes were the results of luck. The Germans believed in Enigma and did not guess the true situation. Many people think that Britain's use of the Enigma ciphers helped win the war. The last Enigma secret. Sadly, after the war, the British government still thought that Enigma should be a secret. They could not afford to share their knowledge because Germany or another country might try to use a machine like Enigma again. The decipherers of the Enigma code were not allowed to talk about the work. Most of them died before their families and friends learnt that they were heroes. Chapter 9. Speaking in Code. Navajo is also a difficult language to speak. Some sounds in the language are not said through the mouth. They are only made through the nose. Parents often want to say things that they do not want their children to understand. They might use long words or speak in another language until their children learn that language. Cockney. English speakers sometimes use an invented language when they do not know another language. Criminals in England learnt to say words backwards, so police and other people could not understand them easily. Speakers of Cockney, a form of English, use many words that sound like other words. Boat race, for example, means face, but Cockney speakers use a short form and just say, "I like your boat." In Cockney, the words dog and bone mean telephone, and a Cockney speaker might say, "I'm on the dog." The meaning is very difficult to guess for someone who does not understand Cockney. Also, Cockney is always changing. It often uses the names of famous people for new words, so the words change as different people become famous. Pig Latin. A different kind of code is Pig Latin. You can speak Pig Latin by changing the order of letters in English words and adding some letters, such as A or yay. People speak it in different ways, but here are the two most common rules. 1. If a word begins with A, E, I, O, U, or Y, add yay to the end of the word. A yay. Am yay. I yay. In yay. You yay. 2. If it does not, take away all the letters before the A, E, I, O, U, or Y and put them at the end of the word, followed by A. Big, igbe. Latin, atinlay. Listen, Isenley, pig, igpay, secret, ekretsay, telling, ellingtay. You can put these words together to say Isenley, aye, amye, ellingtay, uye, aye, igbay, ekretsay, inye, igpay, atinlay. Listen, I am telling you a big secret in Pig Latin. Another code like this places ab before each of the letters A, E, I, O, U and Y in a word. A sentence like, I already know that secret, becomes Abai abol rabe aba abad abi nabo zabat sabik rabet. It sounds difficult, but with practice, you can do it. Pig Latin and similar codes are really only used for speaking. If you write messages in those codes, they are easy to decipher. Wind talkers. Time is important for many secret codes and ciphers. With enough time, a scientist or a spy can break almost any secret code using a computer. So it is important to send messages that take a long time to break. By the time your enemy has decoded the message, it is probably no longer important. Spoken secret codes and ciphers need to be remembered by the people who use them, so a lot of training is necessary. But a little-known language can be a useful code, and it can be easy to find speakers of the language who learned it as children. They do not need as much training. Philip Johnston had a special skill and an unusual idea. In 1942, the United States was in the middle of World War II. In Europe, Africa, and the Atlantic Ocean, Americans were fighting Germans. In Asia and the Pacific Ocean, the Americans were fighting the Japanese. Johnston remembered that in World War I, 17 years earlier, Choctaw Native Americans had used their language on the radio to confuse German soldiers. Johnston realized that Native American languages could be a good way to send coded messages. More important, he knew a lot about one Native American language, Navajo. Johnston's father had lived and worked with Navajo Native Americans in the American Southwest, and Johnston had grown up with Navajo children. As he played with them, he naturally started to learn their language and customs. In all, he lived among the Navajo for 24 years. Johnston did not just know how to speak the Navajo language, he also knew a lot about it. For example, he knew that it was only a spoken language. There were no letters, symbols, or written words in Navajo. Because of this, there was no dictionary. Few people in the world had ever studied Navajo. This meant that there were no written descriptions of how the language worked, and no easy way for people to learn it. Only the Navajo people themselves, Johnston, and about 20 other people could speak or understand the Navajo language. Most importantly, German and Japanese enemies were very unlikely to speak it. Navajo is a very difficult language to learn. It is quite unlike other languages. To speak the language, you need to understand how a Navajo thinks. For example, an English-speaking person may say, "I am hungry," but a Navajo will translate the idea as, "Hunger is hurting me." Navajo is also a difficult language to speak. Some sounds in the language are not said through the mouth. They are only made through the nose. Words change meaning if they are said softly or loudly, or with a movement of the voice up or down. If you do not understand how the language works, you can hear similar sounds repeated many times and not understand that they are different words. Into the Army. In early 1942, Johnston went to his local army centre and asked to speak to Clayton P. Vogel. Vogel was a top officer in the United States Army. Secret codes were important to him and to American soldiers to plan their attacks and also to call for help when they needed it. But it could be more dangerous if an enemy heard and understood a message. They needed a quick way to send messages that could not be easily understood. Often, these messages needed to be sent in difficult and dangerous conditions. Johnston explained his idea. Navajo soldiers could translate an English message and say it over the radio in Navajo. A Navajo speaker would listen on another radio and translate the message back into English. In February 1942, Johnston brought 5 Navajo speakers together to meet Vogel. Vogel gave them a test to see how the method could work. Half of the Navajo were given messages in English. At the same time, soldiers shouted and made lots of noise with guns to copy war conditions. Other Navajo speakers received the messages and translated them back into English. The test worked perfectly. The translated messages were exactly the same as the ones that were sent. Later that year, Vogel started a special Army training camp for the first 29 Navajo Native American code speakers. They called themselves Wind Talkers. The Wind Talkers first had to learn about being soldiers. Next, they had to learn about sending and receiving secret codes. The Navajo language covered many important words like colors, but it did not cover special army terms for different kinds of guns, bombs, boats, aeroplanes, and land vehicles. The first Navajo Wind Talkers developed code words for these terms. Many of the aeroplanes were named after birds, and many of the boats were named after fish. Place names also needed code words. The United States was called Our Mother. The islands of Britain were called Land Between Waters, and Spain was called Sheep Pain. If you say sheep pain quickly, it sounds like Spain, close to the sound of Spain. New words. The Wind Talkers developed more than 600 terms to describe different things, but they were not enough. Sometimes they had to spell the name of a special place or person. But if they used one group of words for the letters, the enemy might start to understand the cipher. So, for most letters, the Navajo Wind Talkers used 3 different Navajo words, changing them often. For example, the letter H was ciphered as tsika, hair, cha, hat, or lin, horse. Of course, it was necessary to keep everything secret, so no written copies of the code were allowed outside the training camps. The Navajo Wind Talkers had to remember everything. To test the new code and cipher, the Army found Navajo speakers who did not work for the Army. These other speakers of the Navajo language could not guess the meaning of the coded and ciphered messages. This meant that the test was a success. By 1945, more than 400 Navajo Wind Talkers were sending thousands of messages. Most importantly, the Navajo Wind Talker code was never broken, and the Navajo wind talkers helped the United States to win World War II. For women only. For about 1700 years, girls and women in Pumei village in southern China used a secret language that was never shared with men or boys. The name of the language is Nashu. Today, only about 10 people know how to speak it. Boys and men learned to read and write Chinese, but girls did not learn. Until recently, they did not go to school at all. Instead, girls in Pumei village taught themselves to read and write their own secret language. Nashu started as a way for young girls and women to make friends and share secrets. The written form of Nashu is quite different from written Chinese. Some of the symbols look like Chinese symbols, but each one is a letter, not a word, so it is easier to learn. Older women first taught younger girls Nashu by singing songs in the secret language, and then talking and telling stories in it. Girls were then taught how to write the language. Often they did not have paper to write on. They wrote on their hands to practice. Sometimes they wrote a message on a handkerchief as a gift to another woman. When a girl married, she left her friends and went to live with her husband. The third day after she was married, friends gave her a special book. The first few pages of the book was written in Nashu by female friends and relatives. The rest of the pages of the book were empty pages for the young woman to write a diary in Nashu. Chinese girls now learn to read and write in school and do not need to read and write in a secret language. Nashu is a dying language.